a great brand experience is also to be surprised by things. And I think, to be pleasantly surprised by things.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Dr. Chris Parker and it's great to have you here for tonight's episode. We're going to be talking to Dani Sampson. She is a freelance brand strategist. At the time of recording, she was working with 2 Elliot, a graphic design agency. We go into some of the work they've done, but we spend a lot of time thinking about what is design, where do we go, what's a purpose, and go through a whole load of projects to illustrate where this is. And she describes herself as helping her clients clarify their brand identity, silos, products and services so they can best meet their customers' needs. I think that really describes a lot about where we're going. So if you are thinking about the business side of design and how to connect your customers, how to produce items that give not only great experience, not only fills a brief, but goes a bit beyond that and actually drives you forward for the next 10, 15 years, then this episode is for you. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back and enjoy my chat with Dani Sampson.
What I enjoy at the moment is it's going to sound so cliche, or not cliche, almost naff. I joke sometimes that I can be a bit of a brand philosopher, and that is it's so bad. But basically what it ends up being is that brands are people, and there is something also that brands having commercial backing. It means that the actual brand itself and its communications have a bit more backing to go out to a broader range of people, and therefore it has a little bit more influence. So what I really love with that is being able to thread through more conscious sort of societal messaging, or getting people to question things from sort of a personal level, learning, educating. So I think that's sort of the key piece for me, and how that threads through into a graphic outcome.
Mm. So what is the brand philosophy of 2 Elliot?
Oh goodness. If you asked, so it's always one of those things, it's the hardest thing to work in your own backyard or work on your own backyard. And when I was actually engaged by 2 Elliot to go over to London, I was actually engaged to also look at the 2 Elliot sort of standing. You can see that brands sort of start and they sort of plod along, or they fly along, and then you get to this point where you have to do a bit of a stock take. And it sort of got to a point where we put so much client work first, as you always do, that by the time I started looking back at 2 Elliot, I was already so entrenched in the actual organization itself that it was so hard to look at it almost with a lack of bias or with fresh eyes. But I did undergo a process, which I typically do with all of my projects, and I sort of ground them heavily in primary research, which means that for me, the most important part really, other than trying to understand the objectives of the project, is to really speak with the end users, but to also speak with the people in the organization that make that organization up. So if you sort of considered what 2 Elliot is, it is, so many of our team members would say thoughtful consideration, or there's such sort of a layered thinking process there. And we're all so painstaking when it comes to making sure that all of our projects are layered with messaging, conceptual richness, so that they don't feel super flat or sort of meaningless in a way. It's just sort of, a graphic output for the sake of a graphic output. But I think we are also understanding as well that what we do for our clients is, whether our clients, we're really lucky. We get a lot of clients that come to us that really have mission-led brands. So they do want to disrupt or bring something new to market, or change the way people see things. And if they don't have that mission, in their back pocket when they come to us, we try really, really hard to give them that North Star, so that everything sort of wraps around that and comes off that thread.
So you said that you are very entrenched in the strategy of 2times Elliot and the brand. What kind of strategy approach would you bring to graphic design?
Graphic design, or if I was rebranding graphic design, or if I was oh goodness, I stumbled upon a thought. I mean, as you often do. I mean, some of my aha moments, or most of my aha moments, are at the most obscure times. You can work through something, and then you sort of are taking a drive, and the penny drops. And one of those penny drops for me was that I had studied architecture, so that was my background, and for part of that, I realized that with a building or with an architectural output or project, you ultimately need to understand what the brief is, what the site is, what the conditions of the site are, who's going to be using that building, how people are going to be engaging with it, how certain physical reveals happen, different scales, all these sorts of things. And you sort of get better at visually communicating as well, because ultimately it's about sort of taking a 3D building and communicating it almost on a 2D perspective when you're doing sort of your design critiques with, sort of quite well-established tutors or people working in the industry who'll come back and sort of give you some feedback. But one thing there for me was that in the faculty beside us was the visual communications faculty, and I sort of had a number of friends there. And I think in a way, when you, just like industrial design, I think, when you're sort of 17, 18, you're just about to come into uni, you don't really understand you almost don't understand what those things are. I mean, I thought industrial design, as I was going into architecture, was actually the design of industrial buildings. So I was, and I even, I thought I might actually move into that. But I think that the point was, when I heard about visual communications, I had absolutely almost no idea what it was. It becomes a foreign concept or an overused term or things like that. But it truly is the art of communicating visually. And we need, and the way that brand strategy, sort of holds that up is that it is the communication piece that leads into the graphic piece. So we need to have something to say and people to say it to, and a way to say it so that it can be actually visually communicated. So I think there's an art there in terms of the way that I might rebrand, graphic design, and it truly is the art of communicating on many, many layers, because you might have a core concept that comes through in your copywriting or your language, but then that concept or that core thread can come through in the sort of the way that you're layering imagery, or the way that you are shooting video, or the way that you are layering or sort of laying out a site. So I don't know, that just feel like visual communication, that's like graphic design is so much more. And also, it's not just graphic, I suppose. So many designers consider themselves quite multi-talented. And I think that's the thing to understand as well. A design mentality isn't pigeonholed into just sort of a 2D or a moving sort of like output as such.
It's interesting to hear you say about the research you do, because I think lots of people assume that if it's visual, it's some genius guy or girl in the corner drawing this thing up and going, hey, I've done it. And obviously there's a lot more to the process than that. So can you tell me a bit about the kind of research that 2times Elliot would do for a client?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely isn't something that just happens. I worked with a designer a number of years ago, and he said, oh, goodness, are they one of the clients that think that you just press a button and design happens? So it's definitely not that simple. For us, we have to understand sort of the commercial and the creative side of an output, and ultimately the functionality of what we're trying to put out into the world. So the research for us will really start with understanding. I mean, and this isn't in terms of reinventing the wheel. I think a lot of people, even UX designers that I've spoken to, they will undergo a similar process of sort of researching and understanding user profiles and what makes them tick. I suppose with that research, it's about landscape analysis. You're obviously looking at competitors, what they're doing well, what they're not doing particularly well. I don't like to just benchmark it at that point, because I think setting a benchmark in some ways means that you just surpass it instead of really overshooting it. And I think in a way that if you take too much from what's out there in the landscape, you sort of start to look a bit analogous, or was that with a word? So it's like you start to look a bit sort of, all the same. And so we look at that. And again, as I said, we're really lucky with the clients that we have coming through the door, and they're sort of doing things differently. So in some ways, they're actually the cross section of multiple industries, which means it's sort of a peripheral analysis, which I absolutely love, because I think, I think a lot of people would agree, and I've probably read this over and over again, but innovation really starts. Well, innovation happens all the time, but innovation also happens really well at the cross section of two industries, where it's sort of the bridging of two, or multiple. So, but yeah, we sort of go through that competitor analysis, and then we really dive into the user interviews. And I think the way that the core point of those interviews is obviously to understand what someone wants from the brand. But for me, it's not a market research exercise alone. It is very much almost an anthropological exercise, where we might get clients coming to us and they're super savvy, and they've sort of done their research. They know what their business is, and they know their business better than anyone else ultimately. And they've maybe done the research, but the piece that's always missing, or often missing from that when we get those handovers, if they come to us with a substantial amount of research, is that sort of more emotive piece. And I think that's what makes sort of the consumer tick. And almost in a way, those interviews are the ones that you just have to sort of see where the thread takes you. And you have to be ready to be quite tangential and sort of like let the conversation flow and dig a little deeper, and not just ask as if the questions are just, 1, 2, 3. I've got the answers and I've done the job. And then, I think so primarily that's what happens. And then it starts to become this broader conceptual research piece. And, when we were rewriting sort of the bio, or the descriptor for 2 times Elliot, and it sort of says something like, all of our work is underpinned by a worldly concept. And that sort of idea where it might either reference some environmental, societal, cultural, conceptual, could be something like Epicureanism, or, like there's sort of that's sort of where it leads. And I think, one of our designers, or so many of the designers have sort of given me so much richness to my process and added to my process, and I hope that I've added to theirs. But this idea of free association, I think that was something that I didn't realize that I was doing in my work, but just to sort of let the mind wander in almost a contemplative sense, and start putting together the or like connecting the dots, per se.
Yeah, well, people at your website, I think on the front page it says self-initiated works that are an integral part of our studio development. So what does self-initiated mean to you when you've got these clients, got these visions, got these strategies, got these briefs? What does self-initiated mean?
Well, self-initiated for us is about giving the team really the option to do something that really makes them tick. And I think a lot of the projects we take on because we love them, and we're very lucky in that sense. But I think to be able to direct almost your own brief, and I think sometimes the brief writing is the hardest, and that's something that sort of the strategic process also underpins, or sort of front ends the design process. We have to make sure that the briefs are absolutely watertight, because the project is only as good as a brief. But I think the way that the self-initiated has been working is just really trying to ask the designers and the team, who do you want to work with? What do you want to work on? What do you want to learn more about? And also to help the team, and they're at varying levels of seniority, So to help the team actually go out and be, they're all curious individuals, but to actually go out and sort of seek out opportunities for collaboration, to learn, to grow. And, it is extremely hard to fit that in. That is a very, very honest, point of view there. For us, obviously, it's always client first ultimately, but we know that by doing this work, we not only keep the designers happy, engaged, but we also let them explore and, come back to that idea about free association and sort of expanding their minds and expanding their skill sets. Ultimately, we're all learning, we're all sponges. So if you sort of catalyze that learning, then we bring those learnings back to our projects. And that's actually been, integral as well to the sort of internal restructure that's going on at the moment that we haven't necessarily shouted about just yet, because we're sort of undertaking our own website project, which they are beasts, websites in and of themselves. So, it always takes about 10 times longer than you think it does, for your own stuff at least. Obviously, clients, there's hard deadlines and you work to it. But so it's been integral to restructuring internally.
Okay, so giving your designers the freedom to do what they love sounds like a wonderful way to work. What's it that makes you tick, Dani?
Oof. I really think it is the learning piece. I mean, I get to come to work pretty much every day, or sort of metaphorically now to work, because everyone's still working from home, or a lot of us are. I absolutely love the learning piece, and I love the challenge, and I love the teamwork, and I love also understanding how people think and how they work. And I can sort of elaborate on that. The learning piece for me is that I get to just sort of come in and dive in head first. And, at the moment we're working on a project that is around cognitive change. So, how do you change behaviors? We're always, being that it's a new project, I can't speak too broad, too sort of like specifically about it. But I get to go in and learn about how the brain works and how to rewire it. And, it's almost like every project that comes through the door, I get to become sort of a mini expert on certain things, and also the beautiful thing about it is, one of my friends is in advertising. He's a copywriter, and sort of, in advertising, it's very much the storytelling side of things. And, in branding it is as well, but I suppose, advertising outputs, especially in TVC, if you're working in commercials, is sort of a sort of shorter, more succinct story. And I noticed that when I started observing some of his work, that there were really pieces of himself injected into the projects. And it is really interesting that, it starts to tap into my life experience in a way, in terms of, things that have been said to me, or experiences that I've had, or, how I put myself into the shoes of, a consumer that we're going to be speaking to, or a service or a solution that we're going to be providing. And I think it's about really bringing almost that super, super human, like human side perspective to each of those brands, so that it resonates and speaks to those people. So yeah, for me, it's massively about the learning. And also, I love design. I mean, I decided not to stick with architecture, a decade ago now. And I don't regret that. I think architecture is a very tough industry to be in. It can sometimes be a little thankless on a number of levels, and you have to truly, truly, live and breathe it and love it, and live it. So, but at the same time, I didn't want to lose that side of conceptualizing graphically, or bringing together ideas and getting sketches down on paper. And I think being able to work so closely with a design team that is uber talented, allows me to almost dip my toe in every once in a while, when I'm allowed.
Now, I really love that phrase you said about superhuman, insights. I think I start using that. It's really nice. if human experience and your life experience has helped you be great at what you're doing, what lessons from your background do you think helped you the most?
Whew. That's a big one. That's almost like a psychology piece. I think that um, it's probably more about the person I am and less so about the sort of. I mean, there is a concept that I was sort of listening to. There's a podcast I absolutely love by Krista Tippett, and she had it's called On Being, and I feel so sad that I don't remember who she was interviewing at the time, but he spoke about this really beautiful concept of deep time. And it was the idea that it sort of doesn't just work, like our lives don't work necessarily in this sort of linear fashion, or not every experience is as sort of deep and important and sort of memorable as the others, but that we sort of almost pinpoint or punctuate our lives with these sort of really pivotal moments that stick with us or change us or add to us or subtract from us and all these sorts of things. But I think, just such an openness, I think, in a way, I'm not afraid to make a fool of myself by asking questions. And I genuinely am such a curious human. Like I probably would be told off more so than just asking too many questions. But it's a genuine curiosity in people. And I think, there's another side of that there's a book called, I think, Predictably Unpredictable or something like that. It's like and it basically talks about the psychology of the way that people make decisions, and this idea that we as humans are incredibly predictable in a way. Like we choose choose the medium size if we can't choose between the large and the small, or all of the sort of decision making that comes in. But the unpredictability as well, and the rawness of the human condition is just such a beautiful thing to dive into. And I think, being open to people and open to experiences and open-minded, and just letting that all sort of sit with you and come back out. But I'm trying to think of one sort of thing that I've brought into a project that is really me, but I'll have to just let my brain tick over on that just for a moment. I'm sure it'll arise.
So in learning all these new ideas, like learning about the human psychology, saying before that, constantly learn about people, how to bring that into creating great designs and products and services and companies, what have you found the most challenging along the way?
I think there's so many people involved, well, not so many people, but you almost require quite a number of specialists to really deliver something that's quite end to end. And it really is like a delicately crafted choreography of the way that people, interweave with one another and hand over. And, you don't want to get to a point where you're losing things in translation. So I think for me, the biggest challenge is making sure that, each step of the way that we're bringing on sort of expert knowledge, that those things are always sanity checked, with the overall vision of the project. Because I think sometimes people can run away with an idea or a thought, or that they sort of they get excited by that, and I think the rest sort of falls away. And I think sometimes you have to be that reminder to just say, stay the course, and not stay the course in a way where we don't innovate, or we don't move, or we don't kill our darlings if we need to, or sort of strip back where we need to, or be agile, but also just totally bringing people back to that idea of the North Star. So I think that is a real challenge, and it's so nuanced in the way that the research phase happens, and then you start going into sort of like developing market approaches, and then you need to sort of start working out, okay, what's my layering here? If I've got a concept, how does the design team see that coming to life? How does the copywriting team see that coming to life? How does the client see that coming to life? And it's always sort of these things of of creating that, tether between sort of, the layers that are occurring between team members and teams, to ensure that something comes out at the end feeling really well considered and really like a holistic sort of piece.
So could you tell me the story about a project that you've been involved in that has taken that journey of sort of coming together?
The journey of coming together. Oh goodness, which one should I use? I think I just wonder whether Rome is ready for launch yet, in terms of whether they are ready to sort of hit the public. But I think they pretty much are, and we can sort of. So I don't know if you can cut this bit out, but we can. What's it called? We can keep this, like, hold this off, maybe the launch, until they are. I mean, I think it's pretty imminent when they're actually going to be pushed out. So, so Rome is a sexual healthcare brand, and they came to us with a mission to really reshape a bit of an outdated and almost sort of toxic masculine, sexual health care landscape. And I won't name names, but there was some pretty horrible campaigns still floating around the market sort of 6 to 12 months ago. And I think they've sort of been stripped down, and an understanding that, we're moving in a different direction with sexuality and with expression, and with equality and with, non-binary genders and things like that. So they really sort of wanted to create almost a sex care brand of tomorrow. And for us, their research process was incredibly explorative. And in a way, we laugh, because it gets to this point where you have the first meeting with the client, and their first question to ice break to you, being that their background is also in sort of brand and marketing and sort of product development and things like that. So they're quite well versed in the process. But, one thing you like and dislike in the bedroom was pretty much our first workshop with them, which had everyone sort of, bashfully giggling, and, we're all humans at the end of the day, and the Brits are sort of, maybe a little bit more reserved than the Aussies are, but, anyway, so it was quite wonderful to sort of break the ice so soon, and then really go on a journey of exploration, which is funny, because I mean, maybe I say that because it's ingrained in me now, because that's sort of what the end of the narrative ended up becoming, is sort of this, exploration to roam oneself and another, to explore, solo and together and all these sorts of things. But that journey really saw us speak to sexual healthcare professionals, people that had been working with sexual trauma, sexual healing, all this sort of stuff. So it was quite like amazing and enlightening. And some of the things that started coming out of that was the understanding that, sexual wellness and overall wellness can be quite intertwined in terms of the way that they show up in your life. And, asking for what you want is sort of can translate both in and out of the bedroom, and taking the lead on all these sorts of things. So I think in the end, for us, like, the layering of the way that the copywriting started to come together was, this idea of giving people, the questions to be curious and to ask for what they want, giving people the language to, articulate what they want, and sort of, other aspects of giving them the tools to actually practice safely. And other aspects of perception breaking things that had been in the industry for a long time. And so there was a lot of really powerful and energetic language that came through, a very explorative language and sort of almost dynamic language that started coming through. And then you start to sort of understand, well, how does that concept of Rome and what are our graphic pillars that actually start to sort of thread through. And the guys sort of got into the design arena. We already sort of knew we wanted these moments of you get to a process where you think conceptually and graphically, okay, this could work in a way where Are we, 70s liberation, and that's the way that it starts to come through in our graphic design? Are we, on our visual communication? If I don't want to use graphic design anymore, because I think that's the rebrand, design in general or visual communications. But yeah, I think, are we that liberated brand? Are we about, the quiet center for those moments of reflection, or, taking it slow, because it's not about sort of speeding through an experience, but about really sort of exploring, and taking your time. And you sort of get to that point, you're going, okay, well, what's our graphic story that's coming off of our brand story? And how does that start to translate into the graphic output? And it's sort of beautiful how you start seeing, and in this specific project, the actual text and the type and things like that would, flow with, breathing, and it would look like the type was breathing, or, it would, rise and fall, and it would, drop and fall, and, it might say, give yourself some space, or solo, and it would sort of, move out and be alone. So, what is that core concept that is starting to come through from, this really beautiful narrative, through copywriting, through, the graphic output, through the movement of it all? And, the big thing that we are seeing at the moment is like a huge, I mean, I don't know if design studios are behind the time, or we've all just caught up a little bit, or things like that. But, in terms of the way that motion graphics are starting to really, really cement themselves in a lot of design agencies, just because, and this was probably being said 5-10 years ago, but it really is something now that, like, dynamic, moving brands, we live in a, well, not live, but we play in a very digital and dynamic space, and to sort of let that, slip by the wayside is a mistake, I think, and it's sort of, we're getting to this point now where we're really starting to bring motion and 3D spaces and environments, and things into design. And it's sort of, how can you really say that it's just graphic design when it translates into, now this completely boundless, digital space that we're living with, but whilst also really trying to evoke very human emotions and human action, I suppose.
So we're going to make sure that Room is launched and completely great before this goes out. We're going to wait a few weeks and we'll talk. So where can people go to see all this great work that you guys have done?
Yeah, I mean, specifically on Rome, or on all of...
Yeah, on Rome. Let's start with Rome.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, the website will be launched probably in a few weeks, but you can go to the website, and I believe it's romecare.co.uk. But we are in the process at the moment of relaunching that website for ourselves, and having more in-depth case studies. And I suppose it's one of those things for us where we've been questioning, and it's something that we probably need to ask our clients and our prospective clients more so, and take lead from what we do with our own, on our projects. Is, some people love, and I think this is quite interesting actually. I found this out quite a long time ago, that, there are different types of readers. You sort of have the readers that will skim headlines. You have the readers that will skim headlines and sub headlines. And then you have, a very, very small percentage. I think it's probably, you don't try not to quote me on this, because I think it's like, but I think it's around the 10% or something like that, 10-15% of people that will read pretty much every single word in a sort of brochure, or on a website, or, things like that are sort of a quick consumption. And I think, it's just about working out, does someone want all the information, or a little bit of the information, or the top line information? And that's always, I think, the almost the internal debate of, how much is too much and how little is too little in terms of what people need to engage with. Because I think, as well, with digital platforms, and I suppose you might experience this, being in the UX realm, is that it can become very, very confusing if you give people too much. and you don't give them a way to navigate that, and sort of get what they need, it can become more of a friction point than sort of solving a pain point for them, or giving them the resources they need.
Oh, totally. I was speaking to an author, Jay McGovern, a few months ago, and he was saying that websites generally are crap with their design, in that they'll put a frequently asked questions section out there and just long lists of pretty random stuff. Saying, whoever goes to a website and goes, right, FAQ, let's start there. Nobody. You search around, you get frustrated, maybe go to the FAQ, and then you're searching. So it's, I mean, you can go back and listen to his episode if you like. Can't remember what number it is, but it's saying that when you understand people, understand how they think, understand what they care about, you start to structure the content around what they're looking for at that time. And then it's a way with pretty standard kind of UX, user testing, iterative design to work out where is that balance between not enough and too much. I guess there's no real answer, is there? But
yeah, I mean, especially with the UX side of things, it just sort of made me think, one thing I haven't really spoken about is that idea that in some ways the translation can sometimes be quite obvious in terms of what a client needs, or how you solve, as you're saying, like at what point they're coming to engage with that brand and what they need from it. And I think, once you understand what a consumer wants or what a consumer is struggling with, it's almost like a connecting the dots. And also it's this marriage of sort of like, okay, well, we know this, how are we solving it? What are we saying to solve it? What are we doing to solve it? And how does that represent across the visuals to solve it? So it's, it can be this almost, I think in some ways, like there are ways of overcomplicating the processes that we do. And obviously, like, that's not to say that we take so much time with our projects, and that's why they are the way that they are, and that's why that we feel that they are considered, and why we're so proud of them, why the team is so proud of them. But in some ways, the process of reducing complexity is really where we should all be aiming to. So yeah.
But like what we said before about visual communication as an experience, in that it's not just here's something to look at, here's this nice thing. It's that, as I said, like flowing text, like the text is breathing and animating. What do you think makes a great experience?
Something that is immersive as much as it can be, but I also think an experience, and some people will want to, it will depend on what that person likes, but I think you try and give them both options. And one is that, do they want to be guided through a process, or do they want to define their own process? And it's almost like, do they want to be on the journey, or do they want to be in control? And it's about trying to sort of create these, online experiences, or these brand experiences that accommodate both of those things. But I think, a great brand experience is also to be surprised by things. And I think, to be pleasantly surprised by things. And, James is going to kill me for saying this, my director. But, I remember getting off the plane in London and running my first workshop for 2 Times Elliot. And I had heard this, thing, because I'd been writing a book, and it's more of sort of a novel and not design related. But I had been told by a friend that, you need to have hearts, smarts, and farts in a He's kidding. James will absolutely kill me for saying that. But I think it's this idea where it's like, you have to have, the real love and the real emotive side of things. You have to have the intelligence and the education, and you have to, and you don't have to have all these things, but having sort of a, and the latter being, the humor in things and the ability to laugh at it. And I think, finding a cross-section of something that feels real, educational, and slightly light-hearted is almost where most people want to live. It's just it's too heavy, but it's also enlightening, and it's an enjoyable experience. And I think also as well, I don't know if this is an awful sort of marketing thing to say. Not that I really was in marketing. I see the brand identity space as something quite separate from that, but with a deep understanding of it, because you have to understand marketing and campaign almost as an extension of the brand identity, because you're talking about the brand identity as a personality or a person. And then you're talking about sort of, campaigns and marketing as the expression of that personality, or the communications, or the, how it sort of speaks and feels and, lives and acts. But, people want to be made to feel special. And I think, there's a side there where it's about really heroing the customer. And, in some ways, permission probably isn't the right word, but sometimes an experience is most, what's the word, most surprising, if you want to go back to that, or almost heartwarming, almost compelling, if it gives you the permission to be yourself, or the permission for you to pat yourself on the back. And it's these sides. But yeah.
And I got this image of a sort of very self-congratulated designer producing this wonderful immersive experience, going, "Yeah, I'm awesome."
Okay, no, it's more about, like, I would say it's more about the consumer, having that really beautiful experience, if it's sort of given them permission to pat themselves on the back, or permission to be themselves in a way, or and I think so much is moving that way into sort of wellness and self-knowledge. And I don't think, actually there's a brilliant man that I spoke to as well recently, who was saying that ethical design is almost the next frontier of, we're going through UX and human-centered design, and not that these things will slip away. Obviously, they're going to be, so important, if not more important, as we sort of move further and further into digital. But, the idea of ethical design, is it inclusive? Is it for brands that are consciously minded, or sustainable, or ethical in and of themselves? And I'm sure there will be a whole range of sort of tools and checklists and things like that will come into the ethical space. But I think making sure that we work on projects that we believe in is the way to sort of push that forward. Good projects for good people. I'm sure someone's TM'd that somewhere, but that's ultimately what it is.
I think you're right with the whole idea of ethical design, and I think past that is coming to, it's the deepest understanding of people we can get, and also respecting what we find. Because I think quite often people have this, maybe like a first world mentality of, we are the pinnacle of the world. No, we are open-minded, we are wonderful, we're caring, we live this wonderful life. Wouldn't you like to come join us and have what we've got? And pushing that agenda. And sometimes it's going, actually, no, where people are right now, they're happy with that. Let's embrace that happiness and make that really a center of it. And that's not to say that anyone in any way is right or wrong. It's that, I think sometimes there's a greater diversity in culture and society than we give credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this same gentleman actually said, we live in time and space. And, he sort of said, I don't understand how people don't, or how designers maybe almost, they can live in the space side of things. We are geolocational, like we live in, homes or cities and sort of places. And typically we can design for those localities. But sometimes there is a side of an ageism, or an age appropriate, or an understanding of age and time that is missed. And I think that can come in where we obviously design for, targeted cohorts and things like that. So, we know that, but I think sometimes you can forget how young you were, and you can forget how old you may become. And, it's you sort of everyone sits, well, not everyone, but so many people that, maybe are in, in leadership positions in sort of the creative industry, might be, of that sort of like middle age, like early to, middle age perspective. Let's not forget, I suppose, that, we can design for the young and the old, and everything in between, and sort of really take that into consideration. But from the ethical standpoint, I think it's not about making people consume, and that's the nice thing that I really like as well about, my day job, or my vocation. It isn't about the selling. It's about, for me, how can I educate at every point in a journey, so that people feel like they're getting value and understanding themselves a little better. And as I said, sort of getting, it's not my job to give permission, but if I can sort of speak to lots of people, if I can really try and understand the psyche around a product or a space or an environment, and I can try and bring, positive triggers to those brands or those brand experiences, then, that's what I would love to do. Ultimately, I remember I interviewed a range of internal stakeholders, so employees for an organization. And I came out at the end and I realized that there are a few things that people really, really love, that make them feel valued. And it is often to have an impact, it is to learn, and it is often to teach as well. So those three things are quite, altruistic in a way, I suppose. It's sort of this idea of, feeling of purpose and of service in a way. And I think, that's what we translate through human brands that connect with human people. Like, if this is,
So what impact would you like to have?
I suppose I would just like to continue doing what I'm doing. I mean, like clients that come to us that have, a mission that they want to bring out into the world that is a betterment to, society and the environment. And we're all struggling, I suppose, with things at the moment of isolation and tech overload and all these sorts of things. But, we're also really going through, I mean, I don't want to say second wave of liberation, because I'm sure there were multiple waves of liberation, but, from my lifetime and in what I've observed and from my perspective, it seemed like the sort of 60s and 70s were quite, expressive and liberating and, pushing out. And I think, I'm just excited to be able to continue to learn about myself through the brands that I do, and therefore bring those learnings to a broader range of people so that they can learn about themselves and almost liberate them from anything that feels oppressive in their lives, and help them live better, and that's not to say they're not living well or they need to live better, but if there's anything that I can do along the way, in the way that I create brand identities for both the founders, the clients and their community, then that's what I want to be able to do. It's nice to have the impact, and it's nice to learn and teach.
So lots of people think of brands in a very cold way. It's a company, it makes money, end of. And that may or may not be true. But how do you think brands can honestly be a part of that positive change you're talking about?
I think a friend said this to me recently, and she actually runs an agency herself. And she said, I was asked by my younger cousin, why, how do startups sort of work? Where do people come in? Where do they get these ideas? And I think she said something like, there are sort of a few factors for why a business will come to life, and maybe how it, and I'll put words in her mouth and add the fact that, and better sort of the world or add to the world in a positive light. And it's often that people see it's the right time, it's the right experience, and it's almost the right sort of opportunity that sort of plays in. So it's like, where an opportunity and time probably sort of fit in the same category there. But, someone is observing a problem that they can propose a solution to at a time where it is needed and it will be accepted or well received. And in some ways that person has a number of skills, or the right set of skills, or the right set of life experiences that make them the right person to bring that idea into the world. So I think, the way that businesses can sort of continue to do things is, existing businesses that maybe didn't start with the sort of mission-led, mindset, and it was sort of very much a capitalist endeavor. Those are obviously, the market will speak, and I think that's why this pivot as a buzzword is sort of being thrown around. There will have to be a pivot. The market is choosing brands that are doing good for the world, that are not destroying resources or using finite resources, and treating their teams and their people well, and all this humane and all this ethical and sustainable thing. So I think having that in mind and building that into your brand principles and the way that you operate internally, so that everyone you on board, because a team and an organization, it comes from the word organism in a way. It's like, I think it's organismo or something like that my heritage is Greek, but I still don't organismos. I think it's like organismos. So, it is an organism. There are multiple people coming in and out of it. It is a living, breathing thing. And ultimately, something my mum used to say when I was, very, very young, a fish smells from the head down. So this idea that it's all about, a leader basically setting the culture for their organization. And in a way, if you're setting those internal values and those internal principles, that almost acts as, the Bible or the brand Bible for the internal and the external. That's another sort of aspect that we haven't really spoken about here, that, ultimately it starts inside as well, an organization, the way that permeates externally. If a brand came to us or a company came to us and said, we do this, but we want to look like we're doing that, first of all, ethically, you wouldn't do that. But secondly, there's no point. The truth comes to the surface eventually anyway. So it's about being sort of as true to form, I suppose, as possible, about being really sort of earnest with your intentions as a brand and a business, but then also, adding value, always adding value to your community, always adding value to the world. That's sort of, it sounds like a very sort of like ROI style piece of language there, but that was something I was taught as well from people that have taken me under their wing, that it is all about the value we bring to the world. And I almost, you asked me before, as an experience in my life, or sort of a lesson that I had learned that I brought into a brand. And I'm sure there are, I couldn't count them all on two hands. Like there was probably so many life experiences that, or like life experiences or sentiments that I brought into the brands. But I think it comes back to that idea of that openness and maintaining really beautiful relationships with people, because, when you have, those relationships, and when you have those interdependent sort of, like friendships and, families and, encounters, and, it's about sort of, it's about bridging, really. In some ways, it's about, speaking to, accepting, and being as genuinely curious about all people from all walks of life. Because there's, I can tell you there's probably something, and I maybe not be able to remember it because my memory's all here and there as it is, as it is with so much consumption of sort of knowledge. But, I think, there's probably something that I could learn from absolutely every single person I come across. And I think that's just the mentality that I take into the research that I do, and in the way that I try and bring, that to also such a plethora of different people engaging with brands once they are created. We're created for diversity.
So if there's something you can learn from everyone you meet, what would you like to teach people the most? Or what would you like them to know the most?
What would I like them to know the most? Well, I mean, I'm learning a lot about the mind and how powerful it is at the moment. So I think, self-talk, in terms of the way that people believe in themselves. I think one thing, my mother's probably guilty of this, and she's like, Danielle, I couldn't draw. If you gave me a pen and paper, I can't draw. And I think I've never believed that. I've never believed that we don't innately all have a sense of creativity. Just because we all live in a design, like you and I, and a lot of the people that we engage with at an industry level, are living in that sort of design space. It does not mean that we are the only people that have creativity. Every single person can use their voice to sing, can use their hands to paint, or inclusively, use something to paint, and create and let their minds wander. And if they sit with themselves quietly enough for long enough, really tap into some imagination. And I think it might be one of those sort of rah believe in yourself sort of things, but I would like people to really understand that they have the capacity to learn, and they have the capacity to change in any which way that they want, or to stay the same if that's what makes them happy too.
I think what you say about creativity is 100% true. I always have this belief that people look at art and assume that is creativity. And because I'm not an artist, because I can't draw and paint like in school, then I can't be creative. And I think when people realize that creativity can be the ideas you have, and then you're working with people to realize that, when you realize that, it's a really powerful, you realize you've got more power than you had before. Yeah. So what advice would you have for young people starting out in design today?
I think don't forget about pen and paper. Don't forget to go out into the world and take inspiration from that. I mean, being connected to nature, and being nature itself. We're human beings. We are an expression of nature. And I suppose that, there is, like, on the other side of that, there is the technical component. I mean, try and also understand that, having a better understanding of, in this instance, like the Adobe suite, or some sort of motion, or some sort of, and you can choose your specialty if you want, but, I would start sort of broadly. One of the girls at work will laugh if she hears this, but, it's often this idea of like a funnel. You sort of start broadly and you start to specialize once you sort of bring it all down. Or, if you start with a concept, start wide and let yourself, wander and expand, and, and that free association, just, follow every breadcrumb. And then you get to a point where you sort of start to strip away to the essence of what's really important there. But, I think it's just don't forget that living your life fully is almost the greatest place to take inspiration from.
That's a really nice lesson to learn, living life to the full. So, Dani Sampson, it's been fantastic talking to you for the last hour, meandering in and out of 2x Eliot and projects. So I want to finish with this last question. What do you think would make the world a better place?
A bit of stillness. So I think we all move so fast, we all consume so much, and I think sometimes we're afraid to really have an honest conversation with ourselves. So some of the stillness, some introspection, but also, as I sort of keep saying, the relationships, to make sure that you're still maintaining relationships with human beings, with with nature, with your environment. And I think it really comes down to a connection, a real authentic connection to almost like the physical realm and the internal space, and not getting so lost in the sort of digital of it all, but also truly understanding that we can use technology for positive, for positive things, for greater good. But if people have got ideas that they think are, will make the world a better place, if they see room, an opportunity, do everything you can to bring it to the world, I suppose. You might be the vehicle that, you might be the vehicle or be driving the vehicle that brings something brilliant to the world.
And that's a fantastic place to finish. So thank you so much for your time.